Deputy U.S. Marshal Boyd.
Given, Raylan.
The infamous Boyd Crowder.
Either you let me go, or I'm gonna have to give you the slip.
I love this shit. This shit makes me hard.
Just happen to be driving by, huh?
No, I put a motion detector in.
Last I checked, you were a marshal too.
And as a lawman,
I'm suspended.
And then you go all railing on him and drag him out of some restaurant by his nutsack.
They underestimate me at their peril.
Him? People underestimate Bob at their peril. I got mad ninja skills, buddy.
Yeah, you know karate?
And 2 other Japanese words. There is one thing I wander back to. We dug coal together.
Hello, and welcome to After Further Review. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a returner, welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about Episode 3, The Backstabbers, from Justified City Primeval. And before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let me take a moment. Last week, we were joined by Rick Morris, who is, for my money, the hardest working man in new media. And I say that going back 20 years. So, like, before new media was new media. Before we get into it, Rick, how you doing today?
I am doing fine, Jason. Thank you so much. And a pleasure to be here with you as we're doing this season jointly here with the AFR brand and the FDH Lounge coming together, a simulcast, if you will. And only fitting as well with you being the FDH senior editor in addition to your own fine channel here. So bringing it all together to talk about Justified City Primeval. Who better than me and you, buddy? And that's not a rhetorical question.
Getting into today's episode, which was aptly named Backstabbers. And I love when they do this because you go into the episode like looking for the inspiration of the title.
Yep.
And it's fine if you can find one. But it's really a great reflection of solid writing when you realize that the theme of the episode is covering multiple characters in a similar light.
Yes.
The first thing I want to get off from this episode in particular. Last week, we mentioned that there are differences and similarities to these franchises that we're going to call them.
Mm-hmm.
And our first sort of, the difference is kind of a little jarring, was language and sexual activity.
Yes.
Now, upon editing that video and before we put it out, I remember thinking, there's probably going to be some viewers that think we're being a little overdramatic about that. Because it is kind of rampant. Almost all the platforms are loosening their grip on that whole standards and practices situation.
Right.
But we cautioned everybody and said, like, listen, it is what it is. But if it becomes too much, it's going to become distracting. And you brought up the point. The concern is that it could alienate the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the first 10 minutes of episode 3 tonight, I think our concerns were slightly confirmed.
Yeah.
There wasn't an explicit gratuitous sex scene, but there was, let's just call it generic profanity from detectives, from other people that are not the main characters necessarily, but that still kind of felt not necessary.
Right.
And then it even goes a little further when we start talking about Willa, Raylan's daughter. And granted, I get that she's in that awkward teenage, hormones are going crazy, and sometimes you got to let a kid just be that kid, and then we can address it later. But, man, she dropped like 3.
Yeah.
And they, again, not necessary, but almost in like a testing manner. Like she's almost daring Raylan to have a problem with it. And maybe where this kind of comes full circle is that Raylan's not leading your typical always at home with the mother every day. They're not sitting at home cooking dinner at 5 o'clock every day. There's a different dynamic in how their family works. And then when you factor in Raylan's job demands, it's understandable, but at the same time, you kind of almost go, this is probably going to become an issue at some point.
Yeah.
Whether it be show running wise or character wise.
I like to check out other reviews, sometimes other podcasts. Sure. And as I was doing for Succession, and the excellent podcast that Ryan and Greenwald did at The Ringer for that. And they would make, this being The Ringer, they're going to make their tongue-in-cheek references to the concerned troll under the bridge. And that's where, like, I just wonder if maybe we might have been coming across last week like we were the concerned trolls under the bridge. But, I mean, it's a thing where, yes, I think we were kind of vindicated on that, because I was getting a sense of, like, how different this is from regular Justified, if you want to call it that, early on with Caroline the lawyer, and just kind of getting a sense of her, like, with her character and her being a conflicted kind of a person. And it's a thing where I have to say, going back to, I referred last week to Alicia Witt's character, Wendy Crow, from season 5, which, again, we were covering season 5, and I think we sort of embody the consensus that it was, it's like bad pizza, right? There's no such thing as a bad season of Justified, but it's like that one, that's the one everybody's going to put in 6th place, so to speak. But it's like the way that Caroline is being handled here, I think is so much better than what they did with Wendy Crow. They're handling it so much better as far as how they're portraying her being conflicted, and it's in a much more sophisticated kind of a way. So there's things I like better about the original, the mothership, if you will, but as far as like how they're writing this character versus Wendy Crow, I feel like she's meant to be the equivalent of it in this season, right down to the fact that Wendy Crow was a paralegal and was also in the same line of work, so to speak. I think they're doing a much better job nailing it with this lawyer.
And one thing I really appreciate about what they're doing with Carolyn is, after that conversation we had last week revolving around the comparison almost, or the parallels between those two, between Carolyn and Wendy, is what essentially motivated me to say, I think that by the end of this episode today, but I said last week, I think we're going to find that she may not be on our side, but Carolyn is going to start becoming less of an obstacle.
Yeah.
And what I love about that is I can report today, episode 3 did not deliver that.
Right.
But I think it's actually better.
Right.
Because there's going to be this little slow build. Now, I still think ultimately, whether she becomes a full-on ally or if she's just not the obstacle we thought she was, I still think we're going to see that. I appreciate that they are doing it a little bit better. Because that is evident in the fact that it didn't have such a fast turnaround, where it's like, oh, she's a good guy kind of now.
Right.
Well, no, not yet, but we did see in that scene where she's talking to Sweetie in her office, and Sweetie's talking about that there may or may not be a murder weapon that he may or may not have in his possession. That exchange did kind of at least open the door a little bit to the fact that Carolyn's not cold.
Right.
She's not just a lawyer that's, out to do whatever she's trying to do.
Right.
There's a human nature behind that. We're starting to, I think, in general, we as an audience should be starting to warm to her a little bit. But I do absolutely agree that if the parallel is Carolyn to Wendy, from a show running standpoint, Carolyn is being presented much better.
Yes. And in terms of how she's going to turn out on the canvas here, in the parlance of any other AEW fans like myself, it's sort of right now like, is MJF going to do the face turn in the end here? It's kind of the same thing a little bit. And how?
And if we want to use wrestling vernacular, I actually love that.
There's never a bad time to do that.
Because at some point in the first few minutes of the first episode. Yeah, if we're using that terminology, we get the sense that she's going to be the heel. That's just, she may not be the big bad, but she's a heel. And at some point, and it may not be dramatic, right? It may not be a full-on heel turn, but there should be a heel evolution, if you will.
Yep. Yeah, one of the things that you see play out over the course of time, and that's what's going to happen as we go through here. Now, at the 37.5% done part of the series. So as we get to that point, 3/8 of the way done. And one of the things that I wanted to mention here, and this was kind of sad for me and you at the end here, because we kept holding out hope that ultimately it wasn't going to be Willa getting on that plane.
Yeah.
And she did. But it's a thing where when you go back over a period of time, I mean, it's true to the writing of, like, again, if Raylan wasn't Raylan in every way, right down to his stubbornness and everything else like that, he would have been able to make it work with Winona in the first place. And I remember, I think when watching the series finale, it was a little bit of a gut punch, I think, to a couple of us that, you know, this Richard guy that they brought in, like, he seems kind of neutered. Like, he wasn't a criminal like Gary, but it's like, oh, she found another Gary. She found another beta male to, like, chase away the Raylan kind of stuff here while she's probably still picturing Raylan between the sheets, let's be honest. But really, I think the way it plays out in those dynamics. But it's one of those things where Raylan, again, just can't help himself over a period of time. And it's one of these things where, in terms of his daughter, by the way, it shows up. I regret to be the one to tell you this, but on Wikipedia, I just found this. It shows Vivian Oliphant as being part of the recurring cast. So we may see her again, but it ain't going to be the next episode. It's not going to be Winona puts her back on a plane. It's not going to be like that. I hope they give us closure. I want to get closure on that, and you want to think that he's going to progress. But the thing is like, he made it through Justified without really progressing a whole heck of a lot. He'd have been with Winona and had the family, if not, because it's one of those things where I think we all applied our own logic to it, right? Like, he could have had the family with her. It wouldn't have taken a whole heck of a lot. You just stop being Raylan, like, by 1/100th, and you probably could have made it happen. So this was sad, but this was true to the writing of the character. And I think we're hoping for 15 years down the road later in their, universe, some form of progression here to where he can put it together with his teenage daughter in those years and repair that relationship a little more.
Pardon the reference that you may not be up to date on.
Okay.
But it feels like what you, me, a lot of traditionalist Justified fans might be holding out hope for, and I'm not suggesting that it's off the table, is a Dark Knight Returns ending.
Okay.
Now, all you need to know is that in the Dark Knight Returns, you have Batman, you have Alfred, you have Catwoman, you have Bane. Batwoman and Catwoman work together, and there's a moment where Alfred basically tells a story where every time Bruce Wayne disappears, he hopes it's for good. He hopes he can go live a normal life. And that movie ends, spoiler alert, the movie's been out long enough, that Alfred is sitting at this cafe in France that he likes to go to on his vacation time, and he looks across and sees Bruce Wayne sitting with Selena Kyle, who is Catwoman, and you get this reassurance or this sigh of relief that, okay, maybe Bruce can go and actually live the life he always wanted to have. And at the end of all of this, if we're lucky enough, maybe we get like a flash forward and we can see maybe like a 22-year-old Willa coming home for Thanksgiving dinner or something, right? Everybody's happy, it is what it is. This brings me to a very important point that I wanted to find an opportunity to bring up.
Okay.
So thank you for that.
All right.
In the world of content creation and people talking about entertainment, we live in an internet era where anybody can educate themselves on the nuts and bolts of what makes a show or a movie go. And a lot of times people focus on these terms and go a little crazy. Mm-hmm. And someone will say, this character wasn't great because they didn't have character development. A TV movie concept that people now are very familiar with.
Right.
My point with this show in particular is that lack of character development is not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't make the character lesser.
Right.
And to your point, I think that as we watched through the original Justified, there were areas of character development that Raylan didn't have. Right. But here's the kicker. It fits so beautifully well into his character that if he had that character development, we might go, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. So, we didn't get that development in his character in Justified, but I think that's intentional.
Yeah, I think so, and I think you really nailed it there, because one of the hallmarks of this golden age of TV in the 21st century that TV critic Alan Sepinwald first kind of, dubbed it that. And I have the book that he wrote on that, where he wrote about several of the series. And it's a great book, start to finish, if anybody wants to go check that out. But in talking about this, one of the things that distinguishes it in these shows is that they don't pander and that we don't get fan service. So as far as not to say you never do, but it's got to fit the story. That's what differentiates this from some of the schlock that's on network TV. Let's be perfectly honest. Network TV, they are going to a lot of times kind of make it kind of fit in there and happy ending. And, oh, hey, can we get a Sam and Diane dynamic here? Can we sprinkle that on top? And it's a thing where in these shows, they're uncompromising. It's art. They're, at the risk of oversimplifying, that's what it is. And so, we root for Raylan because we're supposed to, because it's a well-written story that gets us to sympathize with him. But it's not necessarily their job to give us the happy ending in this. It's their job to give us the ending that they feel fits. Now, I felt like in watching Raylan through the course of it, maybe he had progressed enough to where he could have ended up with Winona and had a family and everything like that. And you just hate to see any time like that, it's going to be a broken home with the daughter and everything like that. So it's sad on a human level regardless. But it's their job to make us root for him, but it's their job also to tell the story and give the ending they feel is true to the character. And that's what they did. It doesn't mean they did it wrong if we don't get the fan service, Jason. It's our job to ask for it, but it's not necessarily their job to give it to us.
As the MCU was developing, they started sprinkling in fan service and found that particular fan base went crazy in a good way.
Okay.
To the point that they know that if they flood a movie with tons of fan service, there'll be people who criticize it, but they're still going to make hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And the best example of this is Spider-Man No Way Home, which was the third of a series, where you get to see, spoiler alert, look away if you haven't seen it yet, you get to see all three of the modern Spider-Men on the same screen at the same time. And I was in the theater, and I'm telling you, people lost their minds. It was euphoria to do that. And Disney is making quite a living doing this. And Star Wars is actually the reference I want to make here, because there's going to be an upcoming video on my channel probably within the next, call it 2 weeks, because we want to get this out before the Ahsoka series drops, where one of the big talking points is going to be that this concept that we're going to talk about within the Star Wars world was the one time that I, as a critical but honest fan, looked at it and said, you know what, Jon Favreau and the guys over there at Disney, how am I forgetting that guy's name? That this concept is the one time I wish that they did not go the route of fan service. And maybe it's me being too critical. But there is a point at which, even in a fictional fantasy realm, where there is such a thing as too much fan service.
There can be.
And that's why I love this show and lots of other shows that are critically acclaimed. They are not beholden to fan service.
Right.
They are beholden to telling a story.
Yep.
And what I do love about this is there's a parallel. The reason why Star Wars and the MCU get such big numbers right now, in my humble opinion, is because the story comes from source material. And when the story comes from source material, there are things you can do and there are things you can't do. And while Justified does not even flirt with entering any sort of superhero or fantasy realm, what it does is say there's fan service or there's telling the story. And since Leonard Elmore basically is the godfather of all these stories, there's only so far we can deviate. Last week you were telling me about how the City Primeval novel is still Leonard Elmore, but isn't Raylan.
Right.
But they can adapt Raylan to it because it fits. But a show like Justified City Primeval, The Bear, Breaking Bad, these are not productions where they are trying to get you to go, oh, I'm so glad they did that thing. No. they're telling you a story. You don't have to, you don't have input on the story. You don't have to love the story. The story is what the story is.
Right.
And if they were to deviate from that and just start making all kinds of justified references,
Right,
just to pay off fan service, I don't know that we would love it. As you were talking about the Willa angle and what we're not going to see,
yeah,
there was a point while we were watching where my gears started turning. Go, okay, if he puts Willa on the plane, is there a possibility we're going to see Winona in a couple episodes? And I think the short answer is no.
I think we might. I would.
Now, if we do, I'll bring it on. I'll invite it with no question.
Because some shows will sometimes do like this unannounced kind of a thing here or whatever. I mean, it's fine. Just because we don't know that she participated in this, I'm not ruling it out.
It's an interesting dynamic. I personally would just, to use your terminology, would mark out so hard if we saw Winona.
Yeah.
Knowing what we're watching, I'm not looking for it. I'm not expecting Winona or Boyd or anybody else. But in the event that we see Winona, yeah, you're going to see me physically, react to that.
You talk about what would be the mother of all fan service. What about Boyd in a cameo when they do, a Silence of the Lambs kind of thing? And, Raylan's trying to learn from Boyd about what this guy Clement might be up to. How awesome would that be?
It's really funny that you mentioned that because in the last video we put out, I did add something where there's a scene, and I don't remember, I want to say it's 3 or 4, season 3 or 4, when Boyd ends up working for Black Pike or whatever it's called, and he's in the courtroom as the security for the lawyer.
Yeah.
So, again, Boyd, what are you doing here?
Boyd is part of my security team.
Security?
I would never presume to tell you how to do your job, and I understand that I'm very new to the security game. However, I have spent a considerable amount of time hiding explosives. Now, if you would like, I'd be more than happy to walk around here with you, show you where I would hide mine in case there might be a place that you might miss.
You have any explosives on you now?
Do you want to pat me down?
That, although it's not fan service, would be a nice little just suggestive they planted a seed, and now we are harvesting said seed.
That would be incredible. By the way, season 2, that was the season of Mags Bennett, and then the coal company and all that kind of stuff in there. But, yeah.
Hey, real quick, you had mentioned Deadwood.
Yeah.
And while I'm not quite sure yet if there's an audience for a video like this,
okay,
the crossover potential of just characters between Justified and Deadwood is remarkable, because if I'm not mistaken, the guy that played Markham in Justified is kind of a main character in Deadwood.
Yeah.
Beaver is in Deadwood, is he not?
Yeah. Dan, the guy that was Swearinger's sidekick, he was one of the Peckerwood criminals, and I think he was the guy holding somebody hostage in the marshal's office in the one episode.
I suppose I can get a shot of that bourbon.
No, 2 cups aren't just for me.
So.
Oh, yeah. I watched that recently.
Yeah. So, there's a bunch of little things like that in there, and it is a thing. But the reference I was going to make from Deadwood, it's a thing where I have a kind of humorous point to make about Willa, and I have a more serious one about, we talked about last week, the acting job of Vivian Oliphant. I'm going to make a more humorous point first on this. And this is a thing of that Hollywood likes to gaslight its male viewers a lot of times on things here, as they did. And I'm going to give you an example from Deadwood, and you see if you can see where I'm heading with this. So as I was watching it, and Kristen Bell, I don't know if you got to the part in there where she played a teenage prostitute. And you're looking at it, she's playing like a 15-year-old. Dude, she was 24. She's a 20-year-old playing a 15-year-old. I saw that subsequently. She's 20.
Oh, really?
Hence
That's not at all where I thought that was. I thought you were going to tell me she is legit 15 years old.
No. She just the opposite. That's why she got the cap. I'm watching it tonight through that lens. That's why the cap's on. That's why the clothing is. And by the way, I think it was somebody from IGN last week, and my bad if it wasn't IGN because I'm bagging on them, but who ripped her for the acting job on this. Where I said last week, I think she's at least passable as playing an awkward teen. In retrospect, she's better than that. That squeaky voice of hers is probably not her real voice, Jason Jones, if she's 20 years old. So it's
hold the damn phone.
Yeah. And the reviewer probably knew she was 20 when he buried her. So it's like, how do you know she's 20 and bag on the way she's playing a teenager? I don't get it.
Last week,
yeah,
we discussed that review.
Yeah.
And basically suggested that she is doing a very admirable job playing a teenager. Now,
it's even better now that we know this, isn't it?
I was under the impression that she was like a 17-year-old playing a 15-year-old.
Somewhere close to age.
And I don't want to sound negative, but I have never watched Glee, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there is a kid that was on the show Glee that won an Emmy for their portrayal. And then I saw him in an interview. And I remember thinking, the guy on the show and the guy in the interview are exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes me feel like the acting portrayal is diminished.
Yeah.
Now, we flip that over back to this show. If she's 17 playing a 15-year-old...
Yep.
That's not terribly difficult to do, even for a new actor.
Yeah.
If she's 20-something...
20 playing 15.
Playing a 15-year-old, and you're right, there's no way that voice is naturally her normal speaking voice. And her mannerisms that I mentioned last week, the hat thing, the baggy coat, the kind of... and I'm sure there's a name for it, but this thing that teenagers do when their voice moves in a pattern that basically says, I'm saying something, but I'm asking in the hopes that you don't say what I don't want you to. That's not a thing 20-year-olds do.
Right.
So, to your point, now that I know that she's 20 playing a 15-year-old, her acting performance just went up a notch or two.
Exactly.
Not the other way around.
Her acting job is even better than we thought last week because of this stuff. To the point about her voice, it would be hilarious. Like if she gave if we saw her giving an interview to a place promoting the show or whatever, and her voice was like Kathleen Turner or something, man, would I laugh my ass off.
So, Rick, there was another thing that came up, and I'm sure most people didn't pick up on this, and I'm sure the only reason I picked up on it was going through justified scenes in order to set up the last video. The montage, if you will, and montage may be a loose term here, but there was a series of scenes where we see these detectives that we know entering in and arresting basically everyone associated with what we know right now. So we see, I forget her name off the top of my head right now, but the girlfriend in question of Clement gets arrested at work. Clement gets arrested. That whole exchange is... Sandy. In those scenes, which are just very self-serving, no big deal. They're just there to show you these people are getting arrested. But the manner in which it's done and some of the dialogue that the Detroit detectives are giving gave real hard deja vu to Vasquez in the original series when Ava is basically trying to save her own skin as being a CI for Raylan. And Vasquez is very unimpressed with her results and basically says if she doesn't give us something, we're going to come down on her and it's going to be RICO across the board, meaning that they need to get Ava, Boyd, everybody so that they can mount a case and take everybody down at once. And that's, again, what this felt like tonight, was that they were trying to run this like it's a RICO case. I love when we see something and go, okay, this feels reminiscent loosely of this other thing that happened in the original Justified.
That is an incredible callback on your part. I got to say, I never would have thought of that in a million years. AUSA Vasquez with the whole thing of how he went about stuff. And then, if you remember, part of that was because I think Rachel was still running the office before Art came back at the end, recuperated from his surgery or whatever after he got shot. But like Rachel was putting the squeeze on Ava too there for a while for her job. So that was, that's an incredible callback. Yeah, I think it's very, very, very similar. And then, there's some other things, some of these other law enforcement figures also too. I know there was something you picked up on. We talked about this off air, and it led to a point that I had about that.
Yeah. And real quick before we get to that, I just want to say, going back to the fan service part, I'm not asking for fan service, but just in the vein of if they were to give it to us, and I'm sure you're going to understand where I'm coming from here. Yours may not be the same.
Okay.
The biggest pop they would get from me for fan service would be if this starts to get out of hand.
Okay.
And Raylan seeks out the assistance of people. Because I really did love that storyline where Rachel, like we always thought it was going to be Tim or somebody else, and they gave it to Rachel, and she kind of hit the ground running, and I was loving that storyline of her just taking charge. Yeah. It's not her, though, although I would pop a little bit for her. If they could find a reason to recruit, even temporarily, Tim Gutterson, over the moon. I'd be over the moon.
That would be incredible.
You want me to kill him or wing him?
Let's start winging.
I don't know if there's a need for a sniper anytime soon, but just to see Gutterson on set, even if it was only for a minute, I would be over the moon.
We talked about this last week, and the roots of how you got to watch Justified. It was a prompt from me, and that was something that basically made you like the biggest Tim Gutterson mark out there on Justified. I'm a pretty big one myself, and it's a thing where I'll tell you this in service of what you're saying there. One of the criticisms people had about Justified, and it was hard to find any. I mean, anything is a nitpick, basically, because like I said, a bad episode, a bad season is like bad pizza. How bad could it really be? But people always said, we need more Tim Gutterson in this thing. Like, it would have benefited from it. As epic as the show is, a little more Gutterson probably would have raised it a little bit more.
Now, to be fair to ourselves, before I say this, I think it's safe to assume, and I want to put words in your mouth, that if a story is based on Leonard Elmore's work and has Graham Yost or any elements from the original Justified, that you and I would both be very eager to digest that.
Yes.
And I don't think this is a huge one-off. I don't think we're going too far down a rabbit hole. But I think that if they thought they could make money off of it and created a show where Tim Gutterson takes over the Lexington office, Rachel's moved on, Art Mullins is out of the picture, Raylan is not in the... I would watch that. Now, I don't know that it has the staying power of something led off by Timothy Oliphant, but I think there are enough Justified fans that really loved Gutterson and would love to see more of him.
Yes. I think we're not alone in this.
So, circling back again, to your point of the other law enforcement individual that you set up so nicely, I've had this feeling ever since Detective Norbert asked Raylan if he has any kids, and when he says yes, he says, pull out a phone, you're going to want to record this. From that moment through all of what we watched tonight, I've just got this sinking suspicion that Detective Norbert's not going to make it through this season. He's playing way too fast and loose, and he thinks he's in control in situations where no one's in control. And it may not be death, but like he's going to get his at some point.
Well, you're right. He's way too cocky. This is how we do things in Detroit.
It's that whole Detroit mentality thing that I think is setting him up.
When in fact he hasn't dealt with a criminal like this before, and he's up against somebody who's bigger than he's ever dealt with. Now I will say, and again, Wikipedia is your friend, especially when you're recording later at night after one of these things here on Remembering Names. I want, when you made that point to me off air, I knew there was a point that I wanted to make to build on that, and that is, this is a character that is different than we're used to seeing, because I'm going to mention a couple of names here from the original series. There's Trooper Tom Bergen, who meets with the, spoiler alert, meets with the sad end toward the end of season 3 here. Very straight arrow, state trooper, family man, good counterpart for Raylan. They worked cooperatively a lot.
Okay.
A couple other figures to bring up here. Doyle Bennett, the crooked police.
Okay.
There. You have Sheriff Nick Mooney, the crooked sheriff down there in Harlan. So you have down there, it was a thing where it wasn't a matter of having, because like the gentleman that you're talking about here, this Norbert, he's not a dirty cop. I mean, he's a little bit of a renegade as far as how he goes about stuff. He's not a dirty cop. But like the archetype of Justified is, you're either Doyle Bennett or Nick Mooney or whatever. You're either that type of cop or you're Trooper Tom Bergen, and you're the straight arrow guy. So seeing a shades of gray character here, the likes of which you didn't often see. Ironically, that's the lane that Raylan played in some of the time here as well, when he would play fast and loose on getting things done. So you're seeing a guy who, and I always used to refer to him as U.S. Marshal Eric Roberts, but
yep, remember that.
Doing this, but like he was kind of like Raylan too. A couple times they were together, and people were joking about that. That would make a good buddy cop spinoff, and I would love that. That would be like one of the greatest things on TV if that was a buddy spinoff.
Now, I got to share something with you real quick.
What?
Again, because of the digging I've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's the best exchange that buddy cop duo had in Justified.
Miller, would you call this a herd, a gaggle, or a flock of assholes?
I would call this the United Nations of assholes.
But yeah, I think we all saw that went, I want to finish this series.
Yeah.
But if down the road
Yeah.
we had an Eric Roberts and Timothy Oliphant buddy cop show,
Right.
I think a lot of people would watch that.
Well, like, here's the thing, though. Even U.S. Marshal Eric Roberts, like him and Raylan, like, they're not in the same classification as this gentleman here, because he's the guy where it's like, you get the sense that, I mean, he's gotten away with it so far in his career, but his mouth's writing checks that his ass can't cash, so to speak. And that's the thing, like, Marshal Eric Roberts, Marshal Raylan Givens, not the case. Like, these guys can be a little renegade-ish from time to time, but neither one of them is, like, so much of a self-impressed smartass that they risk getting in over their head. This is a guy who just basically doesn't realize what he's up against, and I agree with you, may come to learn that the hard way. He may be a sacrificial lamb along the way, because, again, it's never a spoiler with anything in the Justified universe to say there will be more bloodshed. And if you want to put him as one of the morning line favorites in that regard, I think you'd be right.
But where does Shelby fit into your this or that?
It's interesting because as a lawman, he played it straight. He was an honest cop up until the time at which, of course, so once he realized he was going to be made as Drew Thompson, obviously then he's trying to cover tricks, whatever. Having said that, even in that moment, he's still trying to spirit Ellen May out of town and everything like that. He's trying to save her as he's doing this. So it's one of those things where, and this is one of the fascinating things about an episode that you and I had talked about off air very recently here, Decoy, from I think it's episode 4.10. It's one of the 3 or 4 greatest shows. It has to be on the Mount Rushmore of Justified shows. And there are so many great action parts to it and the sequences and whatever. But the character work in that episode is amazing because Raylan is just, he's just refusing to give him any kind of a break. And he's just seeing him the way that he sees Arlo. And, like, to him, any criminal, he's going to see Arlo to whatever degree. And Shelby/Drew is, I think subtly, I mean, he's not wasting too much energy on it, but I think he's trying to convey to Raylan that the years had made him a changed man somewhat. I mean, let's not get carried away. He didn't go become a missionary in Africa or anything like this. But as far as trying to be a good man and everything like that, I mean, some of that was keeping his cover, obviously, a respectable member of the community. But that's a guy that was a good lawman for as long as he could be. And then in the end, when he was going to get smoked out, he had to do what he had to do to survive. So I put him more toward the Trooper Tom Bergen side of things, even though Raylan would probably want to put a loaded gun to my head for comparing the two guys. I don't think they're as dissimilar as Raylan would think.
Well, no, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there in that there is Drew Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
An event happens. He has to make a radical change.
Yes.
But in order to sell the change, he's got to actually be that guy.
Yes.
Now, this is so unrelated, but I love the quote from the movie Air, which is actually about how Nike acquired Michael Jordan as a sponsor, which has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about here. There's a speech in Air where Matt Damon's character, Sonny Vaccaro, is trying in the moment. He knows he's got to sort of implore the other side of the table to see what he sees.
It's the most predictable pattern. We build you into something that doesn't exist, and that means you have to try to be that thing. All day, every day. That's how it works.
The notion that, like, in Drew Thompson's case, he couldn't be Shelby part-time. Right. Otherwise, the veil comes off and everyone realizes that Shelby is actually Drew.
Right.
So, to your point, I love that the character knew that he had to sell it.
Right.
So he actually had to be Shelby, a good cop, a good sheriff, all that stuff. He had to be that, and then, like you said, to the point where the jig is up.
Right.
And then he's got to revert a little bit back to being Drew Thompson. But again, another point you made, the whole Ellen May thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a lot of people in that situation, once the Drew Thompson veil comes up, they normally would just say F it all. Like, everything can burn.
Right.
But there was still some goodness of him trying to get to do that one last thing for the good side of things before everything goes belly up.
Right. And that's the thing. I mean, I think he even fits into the paradigm that I'm describing from the original Justified, of where everything was basically more black and white. Pick a lane, go in that lane. Versus up here in Detroit, again, and I think this is yet another thing. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier in our breakdown here, that the entire fabric of Detroit being different than Harlan. Everything is more morally ambiguous. Everything's more in the middle here. Shades of gray. So you've got these cops that are not dirty cops like Doyle Bennett or Nick Mooney or anything like that, but they know how to play fast and loose. They're not going to let the criminals outsmart them or anything like that, or any technicality get in their way. I think that would be the best way of putting that. And in that way, I hadn't seen this part of it that you're talking about, but on hearing you describe it, I agree with it completely. The whole thing that they think having that mentality somehow puts them one step ahead of the criminals here. But they are not used to dealing with anybody like what they're dealing with here. And this Clement is on a whole nother level from what they're used to dealing with. And it's one of those things where, like, the preternatural amount of, like, the confidence that he has in every situation, no matter how screwed it seems like he may be, it is just really incredible. It's like there's just a certain kind of mojo about this guy, whether it's fake you make it or whatever the hell it is, but he's manifesting. In the words of our great friend Maya Master, she talks about manifesting things. I don't think she means to do it in a criminal way like this guy, but he seems to be manifesting his own mojo here and creating his own mentality, or his own reality, I should say, where he's staying one step ahead of the law.
Yeah, and this whole sense of Clement's calm is very intriguing. Where does the calm fall? Is it just supreme confidence that he's constantly in control or can adapt to whatever? Or is it just a brashness and he's going to keep doing it until he's no longer in control? And it could go either way, and I think it's a very intriguing aspect that, at least at present, we can't peg which one it is.
Right.
And again, we could do an entire show on the quality of writing from Justified, but it's another indicator that there's this bad guy, and we still can't peg exactly what type of bad guy he is.
Exactly. Now, and there are many different layers to him as well, because there are things where, again, he has this need to be in control as much as humanly possible, and yet to get there, to be able to execute this scheme with a bunch of guys that I think we're going to come to find out he's in over his head with, because these Albanians are no joke. They are not a pushover. They are not marks. All indications are that they are tied to the Albanian mob, and that's going to manifest itself the further we go along here. But for somebody so in control, this is another thing we had discussed off air here, the paradoxical thing of, and I would like to think that there's enough nuance left in the world, perhaps I'm naive in thinking so, but that it's not going to brand me as an Andrew Tate for saying what kind of a man pimps out his old lady here in the service of doing this. This is a thing where, as I said to you off air, 99% of us, no matter how much, if we're wedded to any kind of a Bonnie and Clyde dynamic or whatever, you get up to that Rubicon and none of us are going to cross it out of that 99%. There's got to be another way. For him, it's like, whatever I got to do, man. You know.
I don't want to dip into like real events, so we'll keep it fictional. Boyd, once Ava, and we talked about this too, once Ava became more than Bowman's ex-wife.
Right.
And she became part of what Boyd was doing. There was a sense that no matter what, Boyd's not sacrificing Ava. If you recall, there was a storyline where he sent a bunch of his guys, I think this was the Mexican cartel storyline, where he sent some guys to go pick up a truck full of money, supposedly. Mm-hmm. The moment they leave, Ava picks up that's not what's happening. And then she's like, did you just literally send them to slaughter? And the sense was, well, yeah, but. And it's like, he clearly was never going to put Ava in that kind of crosshair.
Right.
If we go back, like we did last time, we were mentioning Untouchables.
Mm-hmm.
Going with a different mob movie, go to Goodfellas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his name escapes me at the moment, but the main character of Goodfellas
mm-hmm.
has a wife. Now, obviously, he's got girlfriends. He's not a great husband, all these things. But there is a de facto sense that he's not putting his wife in harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
So even amongst mobster types, there's a sense that, like, I'll find someone to carry the drugs. I'll find someone to go hide the gun. It's not going to be her, though. So we could make an argument that idea that he's willing to put Sandy's neck out there is, again, another sort of layer to his crazy. And we could stop there, but I won't, and I will then just throw out, just for the heck of it, what kind of sociopath microwaves a bagel?
That's a good point as well. You just anticipated perfectly here. It's a word I was going to use, sociopath, not so much for the bagel, but getting back to the pimping out thing. But
yeah.
You say tomato, I say tomato. But
there you go.
It's a thing where, ironically, this is a thing where looking at things with Sandy might be the best prism for trying to understand what kind of a character he really is. Because Boyd, again, for all these other things that you will say about Boyd, and Boyd is somebody who's willing to sacrifice people at certain points. Although, like when Jimmy gets shot, you know, mm-hmm. he feels great pain about that because Jimmy was nothing but loyal to him and whatever. Like, that upset him greatly. Like, there would be limits with Boyd. Like you said, he would never expose Ava and everything like this. So it's a thing of, like, where I think in looking at this with Clement, I was perhaps maybe subconsciously applying the whole Boyd and Ava dynamic here in a way that I think is incorrect now at this point, and I think a way that helps us to understand the difference between the characters and why Clement is that much more dangerous as the sociopath that he is, because it's a thing of either he is incapable of applying himself to any kind of a relationship like that, as is the case with sociopaths, or perhaps it's a thing where it might be that both things are true, of like he's incapable of it, and that even if he was capable of it, you know, having Sandy there, I mean, it has its appeal. But I think we go back to the point where he's probably incapable of feeling that way about any woman, about any person writ large. So I think that's the danger. And I think the more we're talking about this here, I think the more we're talking ourselves into figuring out here the core of this guy, which is a huge part of the core of this season, of what exactly is he, why, and how is he dangerous. It's because he's a sociopath in the way that Boyd never was. And I think the willingness to pimp out his old lady is, I think, the window onto the soul that tells us what we need to know.
When Boyd is executing a plan, he's always more or less in control and never makes knee-jerk reactions. He doesn't do anything to upset the plan.
Right.
And I think that all plays into the person he is, right? If we turn that and look at Clement in this episode tonight, when we have the Albanian in the sort of panic man cave room, they're executing a plan. And it's going perfectly fine. Until we get to like the fourth time the Albanian is not just eager to show where the money is. And it's almost like a switch gets flipped. And then the plan kind of goes out the window, and now Clement is just, where's the money, gun out, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that this is some big, Easter egg or anything. It just seems to then further kind of show in little doses that he is, in fact, very different from Boyd. They may have some tendencies. Last week you talked about I think it was like the native genius or whatever. Like, there are things there.
But he's an improv guy. Boyd's a plan guy, and he's an improv guy.
Yeah, Boyd is definitely a planner and an executor. Whereas this guy is just like, I've got a goal, and we're going to use this plan to get there. But if that plan doesn't work, we'll go to plan B if I have to.
Yeah. Which he will concoct in real time.
We were talking off air about this, but I intentionally didn't want you to go into detail yet because I want you to go into detail now.
Okay, perfect.
Up until about, 15 minutes into this episode, if we include last week, I think that the writer's intention from the initial plan to the deviation from the plan when he went after the judge, throughout that whole time, up until about a quarter of the way through this episode, I think the writer's intention was for us to believe this Albanian fellow is just a hapless mark.
Yep.
He's just someone to be taken advantage of. Now, the moment that Sandy in episode 1 referred to him as an Albanian, a flag went off in my brain. Little alarm went off going...
And you didn't even watch The Shield.
No. But here's the thing. And I don't want to jump into, I'm not trying to make this stereotypical. But in fictional dramas, if they are going to go out of their way to suggest that this person is of Albanian descent, there is almost always some sort of mob tie. And again, I'm not trying to assert stereotypes here. But
it's pop culture.
You hear that in pop culture... And your brain is like, okay, is he just a guy that happens to be Albanian? Or is this an Albanian ties to the mob situation?
Right.
And I think as we got through this episode, I think we both kind of keyed in on this idea that the fact he's Albanian is not a throwaway detail.
Yeah.
And you were alluding to an idea that you thought you might have maybe picked up on a narrative that we might get to look forward to.
Well, that it is a thing where... Again, that this guy probably is connected, and that basically, as we're reaching, it feels like maybe we're at the end of the first act of the season here, and that now as he's getting intertwined, maybe the second act is where it gets messy and very much like throwing around spaghetti strands here between, he's going to be potentially at war with the Albanians and everything like that, which by the way, very, very bizarre thing. And I can't help but feel like somebody made a big boo-boo at FX.
I was hoping you were going to hit this.
Yeah, they ran the coming attractions for next week before we saw the final segment. We're watching that, and I'm like, it's 10:54. Is this going to be an underrun as opposed to last week's overruns? And then we see the final segment, And it was like we already knew that everything was going to go to hell in a handbasket in that scene because we'd seen it play out. Like, for what reason would they have scheduled it that way?
Let's zoom out for one quick second. And I'm sure there's a ton of people that are going to watch this and they're going to know exactly what we're referring to.
Yeah.
But for those of you who maybe just don't pay attention to like the X's and O's of show running, the reason don't go anywhere, because coming up next we're going to show you scenes from an upcoming episode. That is a thing that exists so that when you show the final segment of the show, and when we're talking commercial breaks, you have that final thing, and then they tell you, stick around because you're going to see scenes from the next episode before it airs.
Prior to
the whole point of that,
Summer's Eve ads,
right? And the whole point of that is so you'll watch the ads, because if you know the show is over and you're not going to get any of that, you have no reason to watch that final commercial break.
Right.
So, logically speaking, it should be the whole show, final scene, tease for upcoming events, you watch a commercial break, you see the upcoming events, then you get credits. That's the structure of the point of that method, if you will. So for us to get scenes from the upcoming episode, commercial break, final segment, doesn't make show running sense.
It felt like it was like the final tag of like an Office episode, but like The Office, generally speaking, was not, say it with me kids, episodic.
Exactly.
Like, you could do that because like you didn't have a coming attractions that you were going to be running in any instance. It felt like if it was just going to be a final tag, okay, but you don't run it after the coming attractions. It's just a weird when you're an episodic show when you do that. And so that was an element, and there's just a lot of the different things about this, as it was going to hell in a handbasket there in the end. It was a thing where you could see Clement was losing his cool and everything like that, and the Albanian guy, it was just like a matter of like somebody who, again, I think we're going to find out is connected, is in the mob. He almost seemed willfully obtuse as Clement's getting more and more wound up, like, no, really, where's the money? No, really, where's the money? Like, like he just, and smiling and playing it off, and I'm just like, he can't be that dumb. And he couldn't, that being obtuse was going to get him anywhere.
I do want to mention, we won't do this most of the time, but the coming attractions section, if you're actually watching it, you people watching at home, you see a shot from today that shows our Albanian and Clement, and then a few scenes happen, and then you see a very large, dare I say, Eastern European individual looking very menacing, and in that moment, just to cross over into something completely unrelated to any of these shows, that guy that we see that clearly looks like he's probably a mob enforcer type. I don't think he's like a boss. I think he's just somebody that's going to enter the show next week, just kind of, scouting the situation to find out exactly what needs to happen.
Yep.
But just his presence, his stance, gave me immediate Nikola Jokic brother vibes. And if you've ever seen anything related to the NBA that involves Nikola Jokic's brothers, there's very much like a Russian mob sense. Now, he's not Albanian. The Jokic's are not Albanian.
Right.
So I don't want to make that comparison. But just, you can see especially the larger Jokic brother.
Yeah.
Whenever there's a situation, and if you've been following basketball, there was a situation where Jokic was shoved in a game, and it was a little unnecessary, and then Jokic shoves back, and then what happened was the Miami Heat players basically were threatening and saying, we're going to meet you outside. This is happening.
Years before the finals, by the way.
Yes, this was a few years ago.
Yeah.
And basically, the funny story about this, for those that don't know, Nikola Jokic's brothers literally made a Twitter account just so that they could basically troll the other player. And one of the tweets that is just fantastic in their broken English is basically like, bro, you it's in your best interest to let this go.
Yeah.
Or we'll handle it the way we handle it.
Right.
And what happened was that whole thing got squashed immediately.
Oh, absolutely.
So that vibe that you get, or when you see the brothers like throwing Mike Malone in the air, there's still a sense, like, I'm not saying they are.
Right.
But there's a vibe there that if they told you that they belonged to some sort of mob, you would not be surprised.
Well, and
that's the vibe I got from this guy in the coming attractions
for
section.
Nikola Jokic, presently the greatest player in the world right now. I think we owe it to our good friend, beloved FDH Lounge dignitary Mike Villi, to point out Serbs. They are Serbs. The Jokic.
They are Serbian, yes.
They are Serbian, which, by the way, more or less, same neighborhood as Albania, give or take a couple 100 miles or 1,000 miles or whatever. But
culturally not terribly far apart.
Culturally and geographically, same corner of Europe. So I agree with you in the pop culture sense. Before anybody jumps down your throat,
I agree with
you. I agree.
Yeah, I'm not trying to make that assertion. It's just
You're
in
not
TV and movies.
You're not stereotyping. We're going off of pop culture and the way Hollywood presents things. Because if we weren't meant to think that these guys might not be marks, they would have said, yeah, we got this Belgian guy, or we got this Norwegian guy. That would be meant to telegraph harmlessness. Albanian is not meant to telegraph harmlessness. Don't take it up with me. Take it up with Hollywood. That's the message they consistently send.
We're definitely going to get an Albanian mob or Albanian family dynamic that's going to come into play here. And I think you're absolutely right. I think what we have just experienced with Willa getting on the plane, the Rico arrests, all that stuff, I think it's not closure, but I think we are transitioning into that second act. And I think what we're going to see in the next couple to few episodes is just like in Justified, whether it was the Mexicans, the Detroit mob, you're going to get some sort of organized crime element. And we would have been foolish to think we weren't going to get that.
Right.
And I think it's absolutely certain that the Albanians are going to play that role.
Yeah.
Now the question then becomes, I guess, does Clement remain the all-time big bad of this series, or are we about to experience a transition of some sort of mix of both or whatever? But if Justified is any indication, they start sprinkling in a mob effect, this show's about to just hit another gear.
And it feels like it's going to go that way. And I will say that, like, as far as what this is putting me in mind of, in some of the best ways, is season 2 of Fargo, which is just freaking amazing. And that is a season about a gang war in 1979 and between the Fargo mob and the Kansas City mob, and of somebody like being, stuck in the middle of it. Two figures actually being stuck in the middle of it. And then it keeps getting messier and messier, and it's a maelstrom that just keeps sucking people into it. In this case, that's going to be Raylan, that's going to be law enforcement. They're trying to untangle stuff. But this guy clearly is in the midst of some kind of an issue there, which, by the way, neither one of us should feel bad. You for what you read on IMDb and said, me for what I read on the FX synopsis and said, because, again, how much of a spoiler are we giving when this freaking Albanian guy is pulling guns out of this safe here, all these loaded badass.
Oh, no, the episode took us there for sure.
And I don't have the money on me, but I got a bunch of money. So it's like, so it's like this like...
I did love the Venmo callback, though.
Oh,
that was fun.
That was.
But again, the Venmo thing, although it's kind of just a throwaway line and it's a reference to episode 1, it's giving the sense, though, to essentially this criminal who's kind of detached from today.
Right.
Because he spent, 6 years? In 6 years, Venmo or whatever these other financial apps were not really a thing back then, even 6 years ago.
Right.
So that notion that he laughed it off and said Venmo, only furthered the point that wherever this guy's coming from, he's not the kind of guy that's just going to stash a wad of cash in a safe.
Well, and again,
which leads to that mob idea.
Any kind of joke motif is always worth beating into the ground over the course of a season. My God, Jason, you would think by 2027 everyone would be familiar with Venmo.
You'd think, yeah. I have to keep reminding myself we're not in 2023, we're in 2027.
Apparently, yeah, which is an interesting choice on their part, the way that they set it up, and clearly we're not supposed to see it that way, but it is very interesting here, yeah. So it feels like you said, I mean, and it's never one of these clear things if you have closure on the first act before the second one starts. It's always a little bit of a gray area, a little bit of a crossover on that. But yeah, I mean, him starting to mix it up with the Albanians here, Clement getting involved, and that's the one area where he's getting in over his head because he's ahead of the law enforcement here at this point. But it's a thing where he has underestimated who he's up against here, and this is where it really starts to get messy, and this is where it really starts to get potentially reminiscent of Fargo. And that's where, again, if this show is going to go down as one of the great anthologies of all time, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take, channeling some of that Fargo season 2 mojo, and I think they got it in them.
Just had another random thought.
Mm-hmm.
Our lady in the line of fire, so to speak, Sandy, finds a mark at the casino.
Mm-hmm.
He's got money. He drives something that costs 6 figures.
Right.
And it's loud, obnoxious, and in your face. They refer to his hot dog empire. He's a mark because he's loaded. He's driving an exotic car. He's got a panic room inside a very nice penthouse apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And he's doing so from selling hot dogs?
Right.
Tell me this does not feel like Pollo Loco.
Yeah. Oh,
the hot dog thing absolutely has to be, even if it's in hindsight, has to be a cover for something. There's no way that he makes that kind of money off a little hole-in-the-wall hot dog joint.
And it wouldn't even pass the laugh test in terms of it's a money laundering operation. Yeah, because a hot dog stand is the natural place for an international criminal to go to run his millions of dollars through. So yeah, so it's one of those things where, but again, at the end of the day, for as much as we're dissecting the whole thing of he's not a mark in the sense that he's a naive, innocent abroad or anything like that. He's a criminal, but the fact that he's out there, he's proposing to this woman here, and you said something on an email that you sent to me afterwards about guys that fall in love with a stripper, and this guy is looking at it like he hit the lottery because she's looking to get with him. So he's naive in that way, in a way that he's not naive in the business sense. So he's still a mark. He's just not the mark that we think he is, or coming in to we thought he was.
Did you pick up on the point that the guy that we've been watching through an episode and 3/4, who we think is just the mark basically, when he's finally in a position where it's not clear yet, but it's getting more clear that there might be a ruse happening here, and that Clement, the older brother or whatever, is actually about to rob him, his level of reaction to what is happening was not what I expected. If he's that guy we thought he was.
He didn't stop being the laughy, jokey guy. I mean,
yeah, at no point was he fearful for his life or what's about to happen. And I'm not suggesting we're going to get a moment where he just flips and all of a sudden you realize he was playing them as much as they were playing him. But there's definitely a sense that he's not shaken by stuff.
That would be amazeballs if he
just turned it.
Yeah, if he was going to be flipping the script on them, I think it's far less likely than not that that's the case. But it is a thing where, he never stopped being the laughy, jokey guy. I asked, oh, you keep your guns loaded? Oh yeah, I keep them loaded. I do that with Venmo.
And here's a great thing that I didn't really connect until right now. It's in the email I sent you as soon as we thought the show was over until FX pulled their stupid, their
Surprise.
out of order editing.
Yeah.
But I put in there that I thought it was sort of smart on Clement's part during the Albanians' very weak-ass wedding proposal. Memo to dudes that are about to propose to their girl: don't do it in a bar-like setting on the spur of the moment. Make it an event, because if this was a real thing and they actually got married, she would never like tell her girlfriends about when he proposed, because that was lame.
Right.
But when he does it, Clement finds that as an opportunity to say, "Hey, before I give my blessing, I got to hear about this room," right?
Right.
That was it felt like that was Clement taking advantage of the vulnerable moment when really this Albanian just wants him to say he gives his blessing. That's the time when if you twist a little bit, he may give you what you want.
Right.
And now, after the episode's over, I'm wondering who was playing who.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Now, this could mean nothing. We could just be spitballing here, but
yeah.
I'll be interested to see in the coming episodes what happens with that individual, and if he's just a guy in the family,
yeah,
or if he's a player and we just didn't know it. I'm just gonna get on my soapbox for just a quick second. We all watch TV or have watched TV programs.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's got their taste in movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to like piss people off by saying this, but and this happens in West Wing circles all the time. To me, The West Wing is maybe the greatest television program ever made, period. And if someday we want to have that debate, we can. And I am alarmed at the frequency of people who call themselves West Wing fans who will then say, I also love NCIS. Sorry? That would be like if you said you like Seinfeld, singing the praises of Seinfeld and how wonderfully brilliant it is.
Yep.
And then immediately went to Home Improvement as if they're the same.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I'm not, look, everybody gets whatever enjoyment on TV they're going to get, right? I went through a House MD phase.
Okay.
I went through a Bones phase.
Okay.
When I was much younger and we didn't have cable, there was Law and Order, right?
Okay.
My point is, Justified and other non-procedural dramas are this way or have to become this way, like you talked about with the layers, to not be that.
Yes.
So, if you're catching this for the first time, and you haven't seen Justified, and you're trying to figure out what it relates to, nothing procedural. Nothing predictable. Nothing where each episode follows the same blueprint.
Early because quasi-procedural-ish. But
now, there's always going to be outliers, right?
Yes.
Early in Justified, there was a blueprint that they eventually deviated from.
For the better when they did.
Oh, absolutely. And the next show I'm going to reference, again, completely dissimilar on every single known level.
Okay.
But Supernatural, which has 15 seasons.
Okay.
At 22 per. Massive catalog of episodes. That show started out as a Monster of the Week show. Now, if I gave you the hard sell, and I'm not gonna, because I honestly and genuinely think that this is not in your wheelhouse for a 15 times 22 episodes type of investment.
Okay.
By the time you get to season 4,
okay,
it is completely a remade show, and it absolutely ascended to levels that it never would have had it continued that way.
Okay.
So the soapbox thing of this is basically to say, if you like Law and Order, great. If you like NCIS, great. If you like Grey's Anatomy, fantastic. These are not in the same bucket, though.
Of course not.
So I just want to take a moment to tell people that maybe have not picked up on Justified, maybe you're watching this video to see if it's something you might be interested in. If you're into anything procedural,
yeah,
original Justified, or what this is about to become, will blow procedural out of the water, because the writing, by definition, almost has to be layered, nuanced, developing. There's nothing predictable about this. And if you're looking for predictability, this is not that. So while I would say in my heart, Justified is categorically, either franchise, categorically better than all those other shows I just mentioned, like the medical dramas or the law dramas. But there's something to be said about this writing that we're talking about. And if this intrigues you, please don't hesitate. The show is phenomenal.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where, and when you're talking about, when we're talking about the kind of shows that we're comparing Justified very favorably to, like the aforementioned Home Improvement. I mean, I know I've said a lot of snobby things about TV over the years, and this might take the cake. But like back in the day, if you remember, do you remember the sitcom that it was counter-programmed against on NBC?
I don't. Not off the top of my head.
Frasier. So I would always be like, there's people who watch Home Improvement, and then there's people who watch Frasier.
Because at least Frasier's born of the similar quality to Seinfeld. Yeah.
Really witty show. Yes. I mean, say what you will about it. I mean, some people found the humor to be snobbish. I found the humor to be pretty awesome. But it's like, as opposed to like a complete mouth breather kind of a thing. If you like Home Improvement, sorry, not sorry. That's my opinion of it.
And like I said, I could give you a list of shows that I would watch for a certain frame of mind or a certain mood I'm in, that I would never come out and say, like, publicly, this is categorically high quality stuff. I'd say you watch it for what it is.
I freely admit here something that I haven't really watched that much. But friends of ours, FDH Lounge dignitaries.
You scared the crap out of me for a second.
Anthony and Matt, who'd you think I was going to talk about?
No, I thought you were about to start talking about Friends, and I was like, we're going to have to cut this episode short.
No.
Because you and me got to have a chat. Because Friends is garbage.
But I will say this. I liked it the first season or 2 or 3 at the time. And then I was just okay.
Let me back up, because that will enrage people.
Okay.
I take that back. Friends is not garbage.
Yeah.
But engaging with people in a television conversation where shows like Justified, The Wire, Sopranos, you mentioned Fargo is of that quality.
Yeah.
They're not the same.
Right. Friends.
And that's all I'm saying is you can enjoy Friends just like you can enjoy House and Bones and all that stuff. But the people that are like, Friends is the greatest show ever made. What?
It's a pretty hacky show on rewatch. And we can comfortably say Justified and Justified City.
Oh, Justified ages so well.
They will hold up.
Vivian Oliphant, who is in the IMDb credits, but does not have a picture.
Okay.
And I think that was part of why I didn't find her the first time. IMDb and some recent events. We're just going to shout out a friend real quick. The IMDb thing got me thinking, and I searched this guy because I was going to say even our buddy Jake Digman's got a picture on IMDb, but he actually doesn't. But he is in there.
Right.
So shout out to Jake Digman's his birthday today, and he was in Warrior. So if you want, you can go buy, rent, or stream Warrior, and at some point in that movie, you're going to see
it's
a gentleman by the name of Jake Digman, and it's his birthday. The last thing, I just want to mention this real quick, just because we mentioned the first video. I really like Sweetie,
and
I am very concerned for him. I'm bringing him up specifically for the gun situation where he's got the supposed murder weapon. And I don't know if that's the ace up his sleeve he thinks it is, or if he's just inviting himself to be a bigger part of the larger problem. But more importantly, forgetting about like what will happen to Sweetie down the line, I think that last scene with Sweetie and Carolyn in her office where she kind of does the whole thing where she mentions that her doing her homework on one of his bar stools, humanizing her a little bit more. In the last video, I predicted that I thought we would see her as less of an obstacle today. And we're not there yet, but I think that's because the writers are taking their time with that process. But I do love that the Sweetie to Carolyn thing is humanizing her a little bit. And we're starting to see less of the lawyer facade and more of who that character actually is. And I am starting to warm up to her.
It is, because to make the comparison again to Wendy Crow, the only thing that ever humanized Wendy at all was the fact that she did legitimately love her brothers. And it was a thing where, but again, she was such an enabler of them and everything like that. How much did it really humanize her? Versus,
right.
This is a different dynamic. This is a dynamic between friends, and it's more of a heartfelt kind of a deal. And I do agree with that. Sweetie is a thing where I think going forward, writ large in the Justified universe, it's one of these things where, as far as the decisions made in the writer's room, it's funny because they would always use the whole motto of what would Elmore do. I mean, I think especially after he passed away, but when he was alive, he was an executive producer, and I think like they would run things past him. But it's a thing where, as far as what the criminals were going to get, it didn't almost feel like they were really asking themselves, what would Raylan do? Because Raylan would never give any quarter to any of the criminals, no matter what.
It's not an unreasonable request under the circumstances.
We'll decide what's reasonable and what isn't.
What are we talking about here?
We are talking about safety and protection for a woman.
No. You want a contingency rider on your deal? Here is our rebuttal. Stick it up your ass.
You get nothing. No conditions, no perks, no mercy whatsoever.
And it's a thing where, if you squint hard enough, you could see it. I mean, he doesn't seem like a hardened criminal quite like these other guys. You could see a redemption arc there if you were looking for it.
I think that's what I'm going for here is there's a part of me that doesn't want him to be the sacrificial lamb for anybody.
Right.
And I would love to see some sort of, and it doesn't have to be full-blown redemption arc, but something where Sweetie ends the season in a better position than he started it in.
It's one of those things where, and I'll go back to this again, what I said before about the great Succession podcast that Ryan and Greenwald did on The Ringer. These really awful characters, but they all had a shred of humanity, but they were all like really warped by the circumstances. And like, they would usually say this in regards to the theme of redemption, which is what you're getting at here. And I remember a couple different instances of them talking about something and saying, but that's not the show we're watching. And I go back to this, and it's like, again, the Justified universe, the writer's room, what would Raylan do? The writers don't let the criminals off the hook, just like Raylan never did. I mean, the only one one obvious exception, right? Wynn Duffy went off surfing in Hawaii with the 10 mil or whatever. So, but outside of Wynn Duffy, who everybody in the writer's room obviously had a soft spot in their heart for, it doesn't happen, dude.
If anybody was to, let's say, start fresh, Justified original, and gets halfway through the first season, and has visions of Boyd and Raylan retiring and living next door to each other, that was never in the cards.
Right.
Yeah. The bad guys are most of the time are going to get their just due.
Yes, and that's the thing, and that while he is somebody that we sit here and we look at as being, if not a sympathetic character, indisputably, I would say a poignant character for the fact that his life could have gone a better way had he made better choices and everything like that. And the fact that, again, at heart, he's not a bad guy like Clement, is the sociopath, piece of crap that he is. This guy's a guy who's got some bad friends, made some bad choices, whatever. So you look at it and you squint at it and you think there's a path to redemption. But again, that's not the show we're watching. So I brace yourself, Jason, because it would be very much out of character for the writers to let this guy off the hook.
Even the Boyd situation is not bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's where this ultimately ends up, is whether we see a scene like that where Raylan talks to Sweetie through the glass. I don't know if we're going to get that, but like the notion that he escaped what could have been much worse.
Yes.
And is in serving like, an 8 to 15 bid or something. Yeah, okay. At least he's, okay. I think anything like that will be fine. I just, as a fan of the show, and a fan of this character so far, but I don't want him to get killed off in some cheap way like you would see on other shows.
Yeah, and while I compared him last week to a less confident and slightly less competent Devil was never plagued by self-doubt at the very least, versus this guy is an internal mess. So it's like that's where Devil was in front of him. But I compared him a little bit unfavorably on that, and what did Devil get in the end?
Knowing me the way that you do, whatever led you in your imagination to believe that you could pull this off? Johnny, it ain't never gonna happen, Devil. You should have known that. Devil.
Wait! What Devil was pulling off there, I don't think Sweetie has in him to basically go to the hand that feeds him, so to speak.
Right.
And basically say, I'm taking you down, whether you like it or not, and that's just how it's going to be. I don't see him pulling something like that. But the rest of it, being that, the lackey that, maybe isn't long for the show, I can see that.
On the theme of plea bargaining here, Jason, in our waning moments, I will give you this. It's a thing where I may not, in this whole plea bargain you're looking to do, I may not be able to offer you that he's going to get a lot of clemency or anything like that.
Sure.
I hope this is something you'll settle for. I think it's highly unlikely that he replicates Devil's fate of having his body rot in a slurry. Will you settle for that?
Yeah.
That's a start.
We can roll with that.
Okay, we start there and we work our way down.
Now, so that basically kind of puts a bow on episode 3.
Yeah.
However, in the last couple minutes here, and I don't mean to keep you, but we are in fantasy football window. But I honestly do implore anybody that is into fantasy football, or even just football, to go to fantasydrafthelp.com. Go seek that out. It's a free download. And the thing I want to draw your attention to without going into strong detail, everybody's going to have a start and sit segment. Everybody's going to have you have to start this guy, and you and I can go back decades. One of our biggest pet peeves is fantasy football analysts that basically say these guys are people you have to start when those guys are top 5 round draft picks.
Very.
Yes. Matthew, for those of you that are watching, one of the things that I maybe will put on my tombstone when I die is that Matthew Berry's afraid of me, but that's a story for another time.
Dude, he does vanity searches where we don't need the pain in the ass again of getting harangued by this guy for badmouthing him.
The big thing I want to draw everyone's attention to, when you go to fantasydrafthelp.com and you find the 2023 Footballology Draft Guide, I want you to use your eyes and find a little acronym that will read UQB. You have that right?
Yes.
The important thing to know from that, for all of you guys getting ready for your fantasy football drafts, this stat, all you need to know, takes every scorable metric. So if we're talking quarterbacks, so passing yards, touchdowns, interceptions, right? The whole thing takes all of it, throws it into one place, and designates a number so you can literally look at it by position or overall and just say what UQB number is higher. And if that's all you ever did, you are guaranteed to at least have a successful season. And if you are really diligent and disciplined and you stick to that board and you don't deviate, just from my experience, I'm willing to put my neck out and say if you follow Rick's board to the letter, you're going to be in the playoffs. So, when you could go to all these other places and pay a service fee, subscribe to The Athletic or whatever the case may be, you're paying out money for information that is not as good as the information you can get from Rick for free.
Well, I appreciate that, and let me throw a little bit of love back your way on this. And of course, again, when it comes to football, as our FDH senior editor, you are very strong and in the lead every year on our pro draft coverage.
We're going to just wrap today. This is episode 3 of Justified City Primeval. And as we've sort of alluded to, if it was good last week, it's ramping up, because what's about to happen in the next few episodes, the layers, the crossing over, the complexity is going to get absolutely beautiful.
Second act is starting.
Thank you for joining us. Hope you'll stick with us throughout the remainder of this Justified City Primeval journey. If you're into fantasy football, please go to fantasydrafthelp.com. So it's a great resource. I swear by it. I definitely think anyone that's into fantasy football should use it. And then we will see you next week for episode 4 of Justified City Primeval as we continue this journey.
All right.
Any final thoughts you'd like to add, Rick?
A lot of fun breaking it down with you, my man, and I think we covered a lot of great ground here, and I'm proud to say I think in a pretty unique fashion, and I think we can rightfully promise people we're going to continue doing it that way for them. The last 5 episodes, we're going to keep bringing the same energy.
Hope to see you next week, but other than that, you folks have a wonderful day, and thanks for stopping by.